Today, I want to talk about the future of Phil Collins. Is there a future? Is there more we're going to hear from management or from the Phil Collins camp? What about his YouTube channel? What about his son, Nick Collins? What about the fact that he just sold his music catalog and Genesis music catalog to Concord? And what about new music? Will we hear any? The other thing I want to talk about today on Everything Phil Collins, thank you so much for watching, and please do subscribe. The other thing I want to talk about is what we kind of want, what I want as a music fan to still be released. I think there is so much more. I mean, I've got a lot of life to live, hopefully, and there's just more I feel like I could consume from the Phil Collins camp. And, you know, proof is in the pudding. On YouTube, people are always sharing new performances, a rehearsal video from Genesis. We're always seeing like new interviews that just came out. There's honestly, I have like a bunch of stuff saved in YouTube that I was busy over the holidays. I didn't get a chance to look through everything, but there's some interesting new Phil Collins interviews out there that I've been wanting to watch. And so I have so much stuff that like I still have yet to consume. The appetite for Phil Collins and Genesis fans, I think, is pretty much infinite. Here's the four things that we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about the Phil Collins YouTube channel and what we might see from that. We're going to talk about the Concord music acquisition. We're going to talk about vinyl, CDs, maybe cassettes. And then we're going to talk about new music. First, let's talk about Phil Collins' YouTube channel, a channel he's had for many years now. I believe it's run by a company. I can't remember the name of it. I came across them a couple years ago, but I can't remember the name of it. But basically, they're a third-party company that manages the digital assets and the digital content on YouTube, especially of mega superstars like Phil. And I can't remember the name of them now, but there's a company who will regularly upload content. Now, this channel has 2.3 million subscribers. It's probably been growing recently. What's really interesting is that YouTube rewards channels that upload consistently. And so Phil Collins' channel has been uploading one song from his album, starting at face value, going all the way to going back, including Serious Hits Live and A Hot Night in Paris. If you subscribe to that channel, you've been seeing these. And it's because when people go to YouTube to search for Easy Lover, they want that to come from an official Phil Collins channel. And a lot of people use, I think that for a time, I believe YouTube was like the biggest streaming music platform. And now I think it might be second or third, but it's a massive way that people consume music. Now that they've come to the end of Phil's discography, they're uploading live performances, individual songs. So that's really cool. Here's what I'd like to see from this channel, because I mean, I think they're making tons of money from it. 2.3 million subscribers is insane. Again, I don't know how that changes with Concord coming into the picture, but I'd like to see with their YouTube channel, I'd like to see some more original content if that's possible. I know that Phil did some video content with Drumeo that we're going to see soon, hopefully, but could we do some more interviews? He did the A to Z of Phil Collins a couple years ago, and they put that on the YouTube channel too, just the audio. So somebody sit down with Phil Collins for a few hours and break it up into different videos. What about a conversation between Phil and his son? That's a stretch. I mean, I think it's a total stretch, but there's some really good revenue that could be made by putting in, think of the biography, right? His book. What if somebody were to sit down with Phil and talk with him for a few hours and interview him throughout his whole career? And that could live as on YouTube for decades, if YouTube is still around, as the definitive story of Phil Collins in video format. So I think we'll see some more rare interviews. There's great interviews with like Carson, Jay Leno, Conan O'Brien with Phil, and David Letterman with Phil. Those are all on the individual channels of those properties. So it'd be kind of cool if the Phil team owned any interviews and behind the scenes content. They're uploading some live stuff. I think it's a Perkins Palace from the Hello I Must Be Going tour. I think they need to do full-length concerts because these little ones are great. I don't really have the time to watch like one-offs. I'd rather sit down and watch a whole show. The thing is, I think they can make more money, profit, by uploading shows to YouTube than to actually doing a Blu-ray or a DVD release. And I'll explain why. There really isn't the channels, the physical distribution channels to release DVDs or Blu-rays anymore. Best Buy doesn't even have a DVD section, barely has a DVD section, let alone they used to have a music DVD section. And so people aren't really shopping for DVDs. Everything is moving to streaming. There isn't really a home on Netflix for a old 1980s live Phil Collins show, maybe on one of those music streaming platforms, but they actually would just make more money to take that digital file, 720, 1080, whatever, 4K maybe, and upload it to YouTube and get ad revenue. The overhead would be $0 other than the editing. All of their ad revenue would be profit, as opposed to trying to manufacture a certain number of Blu-rays and DVDs and then shipping it to stores. That would just be a nightmare. Number two is the Concord Music Group. So recently, I think it was in the neighborhood of $300 million. There's a company called Concord Music Group who bought the rights to Phil's back catalog. I believe it's everything, the recordings, the publishing as well, and the same with Genesis. This is a great way for people to cash out. They're going to get probably what they would have made in the next 10 or 20 years in royalties, maybe even more, probably more than that. The same with Mike and the Mechanics. Genesis stuff from Duke onwards. I think it's Duke onwards. For these companies, it's beneficial to own these catalogs because people are going to listen to this music and they're going to rent this music over and over for the next 50 to 100 years in the same way that we're already listening to Genesis music that's 50 years old. Music is rented today, and that's why these companies are interested in buying the back catalogs, because music fans will essentially pay to rent these songs on Spotify and Apple Music and on YouTube over the next several decades and centuries. I think this buyout is interesting because one of the goals of Concord is to introduce Genesis and Phil Collins to younger generations. It'll be interesting to see how they do that. There's two ways I think we'll see. Number one is very aggressive sync licensing. You remember the recent Kate Bush placement on Stranger Things?
You're a Kate Bush fan?
Kate Bush is an artist from the 80s. In fact, this song, I believe, Running Up That Hill, that came out, I believe, in 1985. And this song was used in a modern, essentially young person show, Stranger Things. And so that introduced Kate Bush's catalog to a younger generation and did incredible things for her career. So I think that the Phil Collins camp will be looking for something like that, getting a huge Sussudio placement or Easy Lover placement, something like Stranger Things or a modern TV show, maybe like Emily in Paris. Or maybe they take a high-profile song like In the Air Tonight and license it out to a massive film. And then I also think that they will be hopefully doing more vinyl and CD and maybe, who knows, cassette releases. So I think we'll see more compilations. I'm okay with it. You don't have to buy it if you don't want it, but I think we'll probably see some greatest hits packages, maybe a love songs package, a ballads vinyl, a single disc vinyl from Phil Collins that includes Groovy Kind of Love and One More Night and Against All Odds. I'm not crazy about that, but they could do that. You know what I mean? On Valentine's Day, release a vinyl of Phil's greatest hits like that. I don't know if they have like original masters. Could they do some sort of like Dolby Atmos release of Face Value? Maybe. I don't know. I don't know what they have the rights to. Point is that they've got to make their $300 million back. And they're not just going to wait for 50 years of streaming royalties. They're going to look to try to get these songs used in movies and television, big high profile placements. And they're going to start making records. I mean, pressing vinyl of back catalog releases like the Beatles records, like the Foo Fighters, Daft Punk, Nirvana, all these older bands, this stuff is printing money. They're making these releases for $50, $60. They're doing some cool things like color vinyl and cool packaging. So I think Concord's going to be doing more of that. I don't know what that'll look like. Let's talk about number three, vinyl, CDs, and cassettes. Here's a couple things I'd like to see. I think some demos on vinyl would be cool. I'll give you an example. There are demos for nearly every song from Face Value. Remember how Phil recorded in his home studio after his wife left him in London? He's recording these demos of Face Value. We have essentially a demo for everything except for, I think, Thunder and Lightning. And maybe you know what I mean? There might be like, maybe I'm Not Moving. There's a couple tracks that might not be there, but there are some ones that weren't on that record, like Please Don't Ask and Misunderstanding. There are some really cool demos from Face Value era that I think would be really cool to have on vinyl. Maybe just a Face Value, but the original track listing, but just the demos. I think that would be really cool. I'd like to see the No Jacket Required tour come to vinyl. I think that sounds really cool. Great track listing as well. Good recording that they used on the laser disc of that. Maybe Live and Loose in Paris, I think sounds really good. I think something that could be really cool is like a cassette box set. I am very nostalgic for Phil Collins music on cassette because that's how I grew up with Phil's music, is cassette. I think it'd be cool to take, everything from Face Value to Testify or Going Back and to repackage it in a cassette box set. It's not things that people do. I don't think a major label would understand the appeal of that, but I sure would love to see that. And I'm down for the compilations. I'm down for anything. I would love to see some raw stuff from the studio. If what was he doing in that home studio? I'd love to see that. And finally, new music. Will we see any new music? Here's what we do know. There is new music, right? We know this. There is unreleased music there. We know he was working on a record of some sort around I want to say around the 2012, 2013, 14 era when he was in New York, I believe. We do know that he was renting a studio and that he was working somewhat frequently on new music. We don't know what came of that. We also know that there are unreleased stuff from all of the albums. Now, a lot of that came out when they did the deluxe reissues, but generally what happens, knock on wood, I never want this to happen, but generally what happens is when an artist passes away, the record company or the family start to dig up the old archives. They don't have that artist to say, oh, no, that isn't good. Don't release that. And they start to release some stuff that hasn't been released before, because when an artist passes away, everybody wants to hear new stuff, and they're very nostalgic for that artist. And so there may be a time where we hear some more unreleased stuff. You got to think that there are songs that we haven't heard. I wouldn't be surprised if between over the past 10 years, if he has some sketches of songs that could be completed. I really am curious about the role of Nick Collins, his son. Nick has played in his band, played in Genesis' band, now playing in Mike and the Mechanics. And I've said this before, I think he's going to play a big role in the future of Phil Collins music and Genesis music and keeping the legacy alive. So that's where I'm very curious to see if Nick can stimulate some new music from Phil. We know that Phil likely won't tour. His voice is in rough shape, but that's okay. I mean, Bob Dylan's voice is in rough shape and he still releases music. You can fix some mistakes, you can comp vocals, but really I think you can also write songs to your new voice. You can write lower key songs. It would be cool to see Phil do an acoustic version of some of his greatest hits, just him on the piano singing in that kind of more mature, scruffy voice. Maybe his son playing piano. Gosh, that would be amazing. I think it would win a Grammy. Here's my vision for a new album. Take something like Face Value, mix it with something like The Intimacy of Both Sides. Do something like what Rick Rubin did with Johnny Cash, where it's just stripped back. Maybe it's some modern covers, really, really whispered vocals, real pianos, maybe vintage pianos, maybe the CP70 or the DX7, some subtle drumming from his son. You don't have to make another Dance into the Light or another But Seriously, but just a really intimate, quiet, Face Value type record. Face Value is so cool because the drums are so tight and small and the bass is subtle. Everything is very subtle. He would get far more expansive with the production later on. My vision for a record is something like Face Value mixed in with the intimacy and the one-on-one nature of both sides. 9 songs, 10 songs, keep it simple, keep it very raw, very personal. If that were to be released today, I guarantee you that would be nominated for a Grammy for Album of the Year. I mean, think, legacy artists like Robert Plant, Ray Charles, and Daft Punk even had these late career Album of the Year things. Beck did a similar thing and won Album of the Year. I just think, gosh, please, Nick, Phil, get together, make something, get Hugh together, do something straight to tape. I think it'd be awesome. So what would you like to see from Phil? We'll talk about the Genesis camp another day, but what would you like to see in the future of the Phil Collins? Would you like to see some more interviews behind the scenes? Here's some other stuff. I was thinking about more reissues. I'm down for more reissues as long as they're creative and exciting. Biography part 2. Is there more to the story? A history book or a coffee table book would be kind of cool. We have some of those with Genesis, not official ones, except for chapter and verse, but maybe a photography book of Phil would be really cool. And then future episodes of the podcast. Get him talking more. That A to Z podcast was okay. Maybe he wants to come on here and chat. What would you like to see from Phil? Thanks for watching.